have come here this evening to know something about holiness, because all of us are called to holiness. Be holy as God, your Lord, the Lord your God is holy. So that's our vocation, called to holiness. And that holiness began when we were baptized in Jesus. The day we were baptized, the path and the journey to holiness began. And if you and I were to describe that holiness is becoming more and more like Jesus. To think like Him, to love like Him, to live like Him, to forgive like Him, to serve like Him, and ultimately, even to be crucified in Him. That's why Jesus says, if you wish to be my disciple, take up your cross and follow me. So this man, Saint Charbel, right from a young age, he was drawn to that holiness. In fact, all of us are drawn to that holiness, except that we are distracted. He was focused. He listened. At the age of 13, he joined the monastery. Of course, they didn't take him in immediately. He had to jump through a number of hoops before he finally got there. But he trained, he focused, he listened, and he followed. Beautiful qualities of becoming like Jesus. And he spent his years in the monastery. He didn't do big things. He didn't do extraordinary things. In fact, he did nothing. In fact, he was a committed hermit. And he was obedient. He was chaste. He lived a life of poverty. And he submitted to the abbot. The abbot is like the bishop of the monastery. He pledged himself to the evangelical vows. If you read the Gospels, you'll know what the evangelical vows are: obedience, chastity, poverty. So he committed himself to those vows, and he lived it faithfully every day. In the monastery, he prayed. He gave himself up to a life of prayer. He had a great love for the Blessed Sacrament. His life story says, before he celebrated Mass every day, he would spend 1 hour preparing himself. And then after the liturgy, after the Mass, he would spend 1 hour thanking the Lord. How much of time do we spend preparing ourselves and thanking the Lord and coming for Mass? You see how he was focused. Here was the man answering his call to holiness. Now, in the monastery, there were two sections. One is the common section with all the monks living in a common life there together. The second type of life was to live alone in a hermitage. Now, to get there, the monks had to really be selected by their abbot through a life of prayer, penance, and sacrifice to become a hermit. He desired to be a hermit. And he asked the Lord for a sign. So before he went into this retreat, where the abbot would select the monks to go to be living in the hermitage, he was supposed to write a report of something. And in those days, remember he was born in 1828. There were no electric lights in Lebanon. I don't know if they were here already. Couldn't have been. So they lived by little oil lamps. So as he was writing his report, the oil lamp went out. So he went to the servers, the lay servers and asked the lay server, please fill this oil with lamp. Fill this lamp with oil. But the server wanted to play a prank on him. He poured water into the lamp. With great faith, Charbel took the lamp and went to his room, lit it, and it started lighting. And here was this lay server holding his breath. He wanted to laugh. He's having a joke on this man. But the lamp was lighting. And the monk went to his room, finished his work. This lay server was really shocked. So he went to the abbot and said, I confess. This is what I've done to the monk Charbel. I filled water in his lamp. So the abbot said, okay, let me go and see. Both of them went to the room, to the cell, and what did they see? The lamp was burning. And the abbot didn't believe him. So he took the lamp and emptied the lamp. There was water. The lamp burned on water. But to Charbel, that was the sign for him to become a monk in the hermitage. You see how he took these little signs for God to speak to his heart. Nothing happened during his life. He was faithful. For 23 years he lived in the hermitage. Nothing special, nothing extraordinary. He died in 1898 on Christmas Eve. And that is when everything started. When he died, there was a heavy snowfall outside, so heavy that they never had a snowfall so heavy. And in those countries, they would bury them immediately. So he died at night. So they put his body out in the Blessed Sacrament Chapel. The tabernacle was up there. His body was laid out here. Heavy snowfall. And the monks were worried how to get this man into that grave. The next day, volunteers from the local village, somehow the news went out. There was no texting and no Wi-Fi and internet, but the news went out, and a few people came in with shovels to take the snow out. They put him in the coffin the next day, and then they carried him out. As soon as they went out of the church, the snow stopped, sun started shining, and the snow melted along the way. Then they said, there's something special going on here. They buried him, and for 45 days after that, people began to see a light emanating from the tomb, from the cemetery, from the grave in the cemetery, which was across the monastery. And who saw it? All the lay workers living in the villages around, they would see at night a brilliant light. Of course, the monks never believed that. But they told the monks, come and see. No, we don't. We don't see those things. That's your imagination. Then the abbot got a little curious and he said, I think I must see this. In those days, there were no telephones. So how to tell the monk when the lights came on in the graveyard? So they said, okay, we'll indicate it by shooting a hunting gun up in the air. So one night, the monks heard that hunting gun go off, and they all rushed out into the graveyard, and there they saw a brilliant light emanating from his tomb. For 45 days, that light went on and on. And there's a story of the local administrator of that area, like the mayor of the town. He was looking out for a prisoner who had escaped. He had his soldiers with him, so they came toward the monastery at night. And what did they see? This brilliant light in the monastery. And they were Muslims. The local administrator was a Muslim, because what did they do? They followed the light. And where did it lead them to? Right to the door of the monastery. And they knocked the door. monk came out and said, "What do you want?" "No, we saw the light coming out from here." "Where is that light?" "So what light?" Then they went to the cemetery, and there they saw the light. This was the miraculous light that appeared after his death. Great miracles took place after his death. There were three beautiful miracles. There was the seamstress who was almost from birth a hunchback. And she was into her middle age and more, and news of this saint's life and miracles started spreading everywhere. And being a seamstress, she had to depend on her eyes. And she wanted to pray for eyesight. And even though she was hunched back, her head touching the ground almost, but she continued. She brought her two nephews who were sick, and she approached the tomb of the monk of Charbel. And she stood far away from the grave, out of respect and reverence for the saint. And she prayed. And she prayed for her two nephews and asked the saint to help them to become well. And she said, as a sort of a last request, she said, "Please preserve my eyesight." Nothing happened that evening. She went home, she slept. Next morning when she got up walking up straight. And her eyes, perfect. That was the first miracle that was taken as proof for the canonization of the saint. The second miracle was a sister, a reverend sister, Sister Maria Abel. She had some stomach disorders. Went to every doctor, and every doctor said, nothing can be done. And there was a medical report produced. So the nun, she said, the best thing I can do is to go to the grave of Saint Charbel. He wasn't a saint then. Go to the grave of Charbel. She went to the grave of Charbel, prayed and prayed. She went back home. Her stomach was healed. Went back to the doctors. The doctor said, this is impossible. They looked at her medical records. Everything said, you're a gone case. Nothing can be done. And they gave her another certificate after testing her, putting her through all the tests at that time in the late 50s. And they said, this is an impossible cure. Only supernatural intervention could have done something here. It's beyond any medical evidence. The third miracle that took place was the blacksmith, Iskender. His name is Iskender. And, thank you. And he working as a blacksmith in those days, they had to use hammer and anvil and whatever. And something hit his eye. And for that, he could never see again. For 13 years, all the doctors did everything, and they said it's impossible. Go and pray. So after 13 years, he went to the grave of Charbel, and he prayed. A few days later, his eye opened up, and he was able to see. Went back to the doctors. They said, no, this cannot be anything from the medical world. We checked you, we tested you, we did everything. The eye experts came in and did things for him. They said, you cannot see because your eye is too far gone. It's destroyed. But when they saw that he was seeing again, they just could not believe it. So here are things that happened in the life or after the death of this humble servant of God. What does it all tell us? That we too need to pray. Open our hearts. God wants to use people like this to give us His grace, when we can come with expectant faith, open our hearts to the grace of Christ, nothing is impossible. This saint tells us two things. First, to be faithful to your Christian life. Give your very best to your Christian life. Deepen your personal relationship with Jesus and follow His teachings. Live His teachings. Become His teaching. And when you can become His teaching, the Lord will use us powerfully in His way. Not in the ways that we want, in His way. He will use us to bring others to Him. The second beautiful thing that this saint teaches us is that we need to be faithful to our way of life. His way of life was to be a monk, to follow the evangelical vows of the gospel. What is your way of life? I'm a priest, that's my way of life. What about you? If you're married, if you're single, what is your way of life that you have chosen? How faithful are we to that way of life? In my own priesthood, I'm called to be faithful to the gift of the priesthood that Jesus has given me. Not because I deserve it, never. Not because I'm worthy, never. His grace. His wonderful grace to me. It's the same with you. He has given you the grace of that way of life. Be faithful to it every day. Open yourself to Jesus. Find the time. Very often we say we are very busy, we have no time, I have to do this and I have to do that. Don't fall into that trap. Be faithful to Jesus every day. That's why Jesus says in Matthew chapter 7 verse 24, anyone who hears these words of mine and obeys them is like a wise person who built his or her house on the rock. Today, let us be reminded of that. If this man, this monk, built his life on the rock, Jesus Christ, you and I who have come here to honor Him, to be blessed by the oil, and to kiss His relics, pray that we too will build our lives on Jesus, the rock.